Good morning. Can you hear me in the back of the room? Okay, if you can hear me, clap once. You can hear me, clap twice. Okay, thank you. I actually have not been a classroom teacher, so I'm unfortunately not very good at that, but thank you for humoring me and being present. I think one thing we'd like to do, we'll do introductions in a moment and get us started, but we actually thought it'd be really helpful to take a temperature check of kind of who's in the room with us and what's on your mind. So we're gonna do a few questions. We're gonna do this as stand up and sit down, but the room is so full that I think we'll just ask you to raise your hands if that works. Okay, first question is, how many of you are either confused or worried about the state of philanthropy and education right now? Okay, okay. Second question, how many of you are feeling confident about the state of your donor pipeline and the pathway for additional fundraising for your organization? Okay, so there's some confidence, and hopefully we will further build your confidence today. And how many of you are eager to explore ways in which you can deepen your engagement with individual donors? Okay, we are gonna do our best to try and meet your need. And we realize that we may not get all the way there, but hopefully we can start a conversation that can be continued in the lobby and throughout the course of your day. With that, I'm gonna pass the mic down and we'll do some introductions.
Hi, I'm going to get started with intros. Hi, I'm Nicole Fulgham, and I've spent the first part of my career in nonprofit education leadership spaces and then transitioned to philanthropy, where I served in a C-suite role for a national private family foundation. Across all of that work, I kept coming back to one question: how do we support and empower more donors who represent the communities we serve to be engaged in this space? And that has led me to found the Townsend Collaborative, which is, that has led me to start the Townsend Collaborative, which is a growing network of high-capacity Black donors focused on economic mobility and community well-being. We bring donors together in a trusted private space to learn, build peer relationships, and explore aligned giving across 4 areas the donors identified: education, wealth and work, civic infrastructure, and narrative change. We also provide individual philanthropy advising for donors who want to deepen their impact as well.
Hi all, thanks for being here. My name is Becky Crowe, and I have been working in educational equity for 30 years now, and more than 20 of those years have been in the seat of a fundraiser, leading organizations. And I think over those years got really good at figuring out how to crack the code of foundations and also earned income, partnerships with districts, but it never had more than 10% of individual donors supporting our organization. That usually was a board member or two who was being generous. So this was a world that I didn't really understand, and I'm incredibly worried about the concentration of wealth right now, inequality, and the way there's no Bumble dating app for donors to meet organizations, and even that's a disaster, as most of you know. So.
That's a great idea. Start it.
So as you'll hear, my passion right now has been figuring out how to support donors to go on their own journey of purpose and meaning to get connected to organizational leaders, so that we are shifting the nature of philanthropy from transactional to meaning, connection, and purpose-based work that leads to more impact.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Great to see you here. I'm Jen Holleran, and after 2 decades as a teacher and then as a principal and then an executive director of a nonprofit, I got the opportunity to launch a really large philanthropy and learn and be close to a whole lot of ultra-high net worth individuals, many of whom were so busy with their day jobs that they weren't yet actually donors. But it didn't mean they didn't want to be. And that started a lot of questions in my mind about how do we get those people on to the path to find you guys. Like, what an amazing room of people. So for the last 15 years, I've gotten to support initially that organization, and then moved forward to work with a lot of different people, a huge donor who's totally anonymous, other donors who were really not very big but super meaningful in their community or region, and met dozens, if not hundreds, of donors who are trying to figure this out for themselves. And it really has brought me back to my roots as a teacher in some ways, to think about how do you support growth of people when you've got people who have the ability to make a difference in the lives of kids, who have the ability to connect with you all and bring the resources that are extra to them and make a difference, but they need the support to get there often. And so I've been on a journey to try to figure out what are the tools, how do you meet people where they are and bring them forward and do some of this matchmaking as well, so that we can get the resources to this incredible work of reaching every kid from every background and enabling them to fulfill their potential.
Hi, everyone. My name is April Chou, and I've spent the last 20 and then some years I started when I was 5, so of course, working in roles ranging from being a chief fundraising for KIPP NorCal to being the chief fundraiser for NewSchools Venture Fund back in the day when it was itself in an early stage, to being in grant-making roles. And today in my day job, I work with wealthy families on their philanthropy and try to help really bridge the desire they have to be generous and to have an impact, and to really help them connect to compelling organizations and leaders, and those with a real vision to make this world a better place. And in particular, I continue to have a deep passion for education, even though that's not the work I'm doing full time. In addition to that, I teach a course on philanthropy and impact investing at Stanford, where we really try and teach a next generation of folks who will either be staff members or philanthropists themselves to really think about how to be a great philanthropic partner. And then I also have the privilege of serving with a family that is one of those rare family foundations that has non-family members on their board. And so I serve as a trustee of the Charles and Helen Schwab Foundation. And what I try to do, I think like many of us are motivated to do, is to really play a role in demystifying the individual donor landscape, and also to help families find their way to great organizations that match sort of their passions and their strategies. So with that, I think we're going to try to do a session today that helps to share a little bit of what we're seeing and learning, and enables a shared conversation, and hopefully get a chance to answer some of your questions. Okay, and with that.
So just a quick overview of where we're headed. Oh, you heard about us already. And also there's seats in the front. If you want to come on down, like feel free. We won't be bothered if you walk during the session. So, or stand if you want to. So session objectives, you can see them here. We're looking to really lean into some key insights and emerging trends that we're seeing in philanthropy, particularly around donors who want to give and support to education, since that's what we're all doing. We've learned a lot, and we're still learning some observations and insights into the ecosystem of individual donors and the philanthropy advisors that serve them. There's obviously a difference between individuals and long-standing philanthropies and foundations, and so we want to delve into that. Then we want to really make sure you walk away with some pragmatic advice about fundraising and how to work with individual donors. And we're going to sort of give broad strokes, but we hope that those broad strokes will help you find yourself in that and can help you get started on this journey as well. So next slide. In terms of where we're going to focus our time, we are going to spend the first chunk talking about these trends in philanthropy and education giving, a little bit more in depth about working with individual donors and their advisors if they have one, and then we're going to spend some time at the end with small group reflections, take some Q&A, and engage in that way. So we hope you walk away with something meaningful after the session. With that, I'm going to turn it over to...
All right. Feel free to snap pictures of this. We're going to try not to do a whole lot of delving into the data, but we did gather a batch of data for you. The big takeaway from this slide is that the philanthropic landscape is changing. You're not crazy if you're thinking that it is and you're wondering, like, what has happened here? And part of what's happening, there is tremendous growth in wealth, and that's both a problem and an opportunity. And part of what's happening is there's also a big generational wealth transfer, which means that there's a much more diverse group of people who are able to be the donors. And you're seeing more women, more next gen, younger people, as well as more donors of color being the people who are able to be the donors to support your organization. The confusing part is that where people more traditionally in the past started foundations, family foundations, had websites, that sort of thing, more frequently, people are now giving into donor-advised funds or other vehicles that are just harder to navigate for you and are often very, very leanly staffed. And so we'll be talking a little bit more about those distinctions. But for now, maybe one important distinction to point out is that a donor-advised fund is essentially held at a nonprofit. It's almost like a bank account, a fund, that a donor, when they have a wealth event, can give into that account, and they get the tax deduction when they do that, because it's at a Fidelity Charitable, an East Bay Community Foundation, and those vehicles are, those organizations are nonprofits. They get the tax deduction then, and there is no mandated payout at that point. Unlike a foundation, which has a mandated 5% spend or payout every year. And so that is one of the dynamics that actually drives a lot of this. So what we're all interested in, and you're interested in, is how do you then reach the donor to give them the desire to get that money moving? A lot of them have the desire, but life gets in the way. So we'll be talking about that. This question of leanly staffed, April will go into sort of some of the differences of what that means for you. And then there are also a lot of philanthropic collaboratives that are starting now that are both super helpful, but they also grab a lot of attention. And so you're probably feeling that. Majority of the money that is in education, the good news, education is always in one of the top giving areas in this country. The bad news is about 70% of it goes to higher ed. And we think that there's some dynamics to learn from there that we'll talk about later. And then the other piece is that you guys are good at working with foundations, but how do we all figure out how to work with individuals so that we're stewarding them not only into your specific organizations, but into the field? So they think education is where it's at. Education, as we all know, is absolutely fundamental to individual growth, community growth, as well as our democracy. And so we're all part of bringing these people in as donors into our work.
Okay, there's a key message that I want to leave you with from this slide, which is just the really important reminder, even though it may feel obvious, that the people that you meet with when you're fundraising are human beings with a different set of motivations and needs. And that sometimes when we call someone a funder and we see a dollar sign on their forehead, it can really be othering. And it creates distance between us and them in a moment where you're actually trying to create intimacy and a relationship. So one of the things I want to talk about is many of us over the years have had the privilege of working with a lot of institutional funders where you have a program officer who's oftentimes making the case for you within their organization. But as a program officer, they might be constrained by a strategy that's been set by their foundation, and they might have a process that they're going through where they're taking you through due diligence and asking you a bunch of questions because they're constructing a memo that they have to take to a board docket or to a director for approval. And so oftentimes, they are building a relationship with you and actually may be a big believer in what you're doing, but they have a whole internal system that they're trying to navigate in order to get your grant to approval. And so when you're working with a program officer, they tend to be much more deeply knowledgeable about the sector. They might have very specific focuses on literacy or on high quality instructional materials, or they might care about ed tech or something very specific, and you're oftentimes navigating with that in mind. Oftentimes when we work with an individual donor, and of course there are always exceptions, so I'm talking in generalities, but oftentimes when we're working with an individual donor, they may not be spending all of their time thinking about K-12 education. So again, just a reminder, but we get really great at talking in acronyms, talking in words and phrases that are not really plain English. So it's also just a reminder that oftentimes we are working with someone who needs a much more general picture and for you to place in context the story that you're trying to tell. In any of these instances, of course, the more we're able to listen to what they care about and what they're motivated about, the better job we'll be able to do to tell our own story. It occurred to us as we did a run-through of this yesterday with a smaller group that we probably could have done a third column on here on how to work with philanthropic advisors. So maybe one thing we'll say is we are often constrained by the specific strategy or interests of a family or an individual. And what we're trying to do is to really understand what they care about and help them construct a portfolio that really meets their needs and their interests. And so we're trying to do some matchmaking, but we oftentimes are not able to go beyond the bounds of what the specific guidance is that we've been given. Okay. I'm going to go very briefly through this. Feel free to take a photo if you want, because we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. But part of what we wanted to illuminate is when you work with individuals, they tend to have around them a whole ecosystem of advisors. And we've tried to kind of make a little bit of sense of this. But first and foremost, many wealthy families have a whole suite of advisors and experts that work with them on their taxes, work with them on their estate planning, work with them on their investments, which is what my firm does. And they are surrounded by a lot of people who are kind of giving them guidance. And I think oftentimes those of us that are fundraising are trying to figure out, like, what is the way into finding our way to this family? And there are a bunch of firms that are professional service firms that are kind of worth being aware of. In addition, there's a whole ecosystem of folks that are really focused on philanthropy first. So independent advisors like each of these folks, and a shout out to Sydney, who's out here somewhere, and Alex Johnston, and a number of folks who work as advisors who are really focused on helping people move their philanthropy and their charitable giving. And then there are a lot of additional ecosystem players, intermediaries like NewSchools, Charter Schools Growth Fund, City Fund, those that are pooling funds to really help donors make a difference, as well as local community foundations that are focused on specific places, and networks like Holleran and others that bring people together and really try and build the field. So with that, let me pass this on to Jen.
Yeah. So we've tried to understand this journey in as simple ways as we can. I'm actually going to start on the far side of this, where you have committed, sophisticated donors, and you often see them as foundations, right? They have gotten so committed that they have a family foundation, they're spending time, they've hired staff, et cetera. You're used to them. So then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the ultra-high net wealth individual, and we use that word wealth, not worth, on purpose, because everyone inherently has worth, and these people just have a lot of wealth. They often started out very much like us. They're trying to build something. They're trying to make a difference in the world. The majority of ultra-high net wealth people now are self-made in the US. And so for the last decade or two, they've potentially been building a startup that becomes a successful organization, that becomes a super successful organization that gets built. They also are buying a house, having kids, staying up late with their kids, being awake all night. They are like getting carpool going. Oh my gosh, like we've got more to do with this kid or that kid. So they're really busy people too. And then suddenly, unlike us, if you're a nonprofit, when they sell their company or exit, they have a big wealth event. And so they go from creating the wealth to, oh my gosh, I suddenly have a lot of resources that I can think about what I want to do with. But they haven't necessarily been thinking about that for decades the way we have. They haven't necessarily been thinking about how can I have the impact, or maybe they have with their company in one small sliver, and all of a sudden they've got kids in the school system and they're saying, wait a sec, something's not quite working here, what can I do? So often when they start, they do things that are close to them, as probably most of us would, the things that they understand. Or the organizations that are close to them reach out to them, like development officers are awesome at that, right, at universities. They know just who to reach out to, and they start cultivating them. So it's not a surprise that they're giving early to themselves. Not to themselves, close to themselves. And then often people reach a point where they say, well, wait a sec, I've been funding schools in my town, but actually it's a pretty high income town and they don't really need more money. Or I had a big enough wealth event that my town can't take this money, or even my region, and I want to have a bigger difference in the world. Or what about the lower income kids? What else can I do? And they start looking around and they're exploring and expanding. And this is where we all play a role, because this is where you probably meet them. And you might not even know you're meeting them, because the person who comes in with a $5,000 check may be as able to give you a $50,000 or $150,000 check, but they aren't ready. They don't know that that's like what they're about yet, or how to do that. So again, back to we're all stewards of some of the new donors who are also trying to figure out how to have impact in the world. And then they start deepening and potentially hiring staff, potentially spending more time with you, and then you will start seeing them in more related organizations to the ones that they started giving to early. So another really sort of simple way of looking at it is if on the horizontal axis you see the proximity to the donor, and on the vertical you've got your amount of giving they're doing, they start close to themselves with their early giving, and then with experience and with relationships with you all or with advisors, they start expanding their giving. And they start saying, what more can I do? Where else can I find amazing leaders like this, amazing work that impacts kids? And so we are hopeful that we can accelerate that process so that people move into giving and get the resources to the action.
Great. So I'm going to share a little bit about what happens or what the patterns we've seen when we talk to people about education. And so often when we get people to the space where they are asking questions about education or we're asking them, it sounds like you might be interested in young people thriving or adolescent mental health. We hear often, oh my gosh, education, I give to my kids' school or a local school foundation because I know it, but the whole field seems too political, too confusing, too complex. I don't know how to measure impact. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I want to talk about systems change, policy. Any of these pieces feel really, really overwhelming for a new donor typically. And so we worked on creating a map, and this is going to be frustratingly oversimplified for all of us who understand the nuance of our field. But trust me, even 16 layers is a lot for the new donor coming into this. And each of these areas you could flip vertically as well, and there's a cross cutter. You can take teachers and leaders through all of these different areas, of course. But the key takeaway here is to find a way in. You hear that someone's grandfather was an immigrant here who got a scholarship that helped him to create the path that created their family's stability. That's a way in. We might talk about scholarships as a way to start. So what's the hook? Picture a rock climbing wall. And what's the next hook on the wall that we're going for? So this is a way to start that. And then in addition to that, we thought, this has all been test and learn, but what's the next thing that people might need? Well, kind of a quick start guide, a navigator note from the map. What's my quick start guide to giving in teachers and leaders? And on the table for later, there's a QR code that you can find these. They're all free online. But the basic idea here is an overview that gives you big sense of this area. Why does it matter? 3 big themes, some advice to donors, a reading list to get started, and some collaboratives where you could find other donors and learn more on your way into this issue area. And I think for us, the important thing here is this is not only for a donor audience, it might work for your Thanksgiving dinner table when you're trying to explain to your grandmother what your work is. It might be helpful. But also, really importantly, this layer of philanthropic advisors in the field, a lot of them are sitting at big banks. They may look after 20 different giving areas, democracy, women's health, you name it. So we wanted to give them a way to start to have that first conversation when someone says, I want to give to my alma mater, and we say, great, and how can we make it just as easy to give to kids you don't know as to the kids you do?
All right, I'm going to share a little bit more about what we do at Townsend, and this slide gives the details of sort of how we approach our work. Feel free to take a pic of it, go to our website if you want to learn more, but I really want to spend my time sharing some of the lessons we've learned and making some practical applications for those of us who are working or trying to work with individual donors. So a couple of things just to ground this. I always like to remind all of us that the Black community, although of course there's a wealth gap, welcome to America, we know that exists, but there are an increasing number of wealthy Black Americans that are just growing and looking for ways to be generous. But the thing to keep in mind for all of us is that the Black community has always been generous. They've been consistently engaged in, quite frankly, how we sustain ourselves in this country has been through collaboration and generosity. And also, a fun fact, if you did not know, know, Black Americans are actually the most charitable racial group in the country in terms of the percentage of their income that they're giving away, right? So it's just a value in our community. So at the same time, Black donors are not a monolith, and many of these lessons also apply more broadly to any individual donors. But because we focus specifically on Black donors, we have had the privilege of, we've learned a lot and still learning a lot about how lived experience shapes philanthropy and giving direction. So 3 quick sort of lessons to share. One thing that we consistently see is that giving is often deeply personal and relational. So many donors are connecting their philanthropy to their family history, perhaps their faith communities, educational opportunities, or experiences that they've had as a child in their own sort of lived experience. So for nonprofit leaders, I think the implication for us, if we're trying to connect to these donors, honestly is to spend more time trying to understand a donor's story and values and not just presenting the funding need. It's very different than someone who works at a foundation. They know what you're coming to them for. When they work at a foundation, they have a strategy. It's a bit different with individuals. So the second thing that we've seen is that trust, proximity, and representation matter deeply to the donors that we're engaging in our network. So they want to understand whether organizations genuinely sort of get and reflect the communities that they're serving. So creating opportunities for authentic conversation, smaller gatherings, site visits, and relationship building matter a lot more than the formal pitch you may want to give for the ask. So, you know, sometimes, actually probably all the time, it means leaving that 50-page deck that you and your consultant created at home, don't bring it. Leave that theory of change for a later conversation for the most part, but really create these spaces for real conversation and connection. And honestly, a 1-pager is probably sufficient, maybe even a couple paragraphs, right? And then finally, the third lesson that I want to share is that we've seen just how powerful learning can be in shaping giving. We've had donors come into our community focused, for example, on scholarships, and only scholarships to their HBCU alma mater, for example. But through learning journeys, conversations with peers and practitioners, they started to think more upstream about how are the students that they're giving scholarships to, how ready are they for college? And are they able to get to and through college successfully? And so that's led them on a different journey to start looking at, as you might imagine, K-12 philanthropy, because that's where we know the upstream challenges and opportunities really exist. And so in several cases, that's led to donors making larger and more sort of tailored investments because their understanding has deepened first. So the big takeaway, that I'll leave you with is, the organizations that are going to be the strongest at building donor relationships are the ones that are creating partnerships, trust, and shared purpose, and not simply asking for the money on the very, very first conversation, which I'm sure none of us in this room would do. So with that, I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to turn it over. We can go to the next one.
Well, Nicole actually hit on the first 2 quite well. No, it's great because you brought them to life. But essentially, when you are meeting donors, just be yourself. Like, very frequently, the individuals are actually seeking connection. They're sometimes at a sort of pivot point in their lives. They've retired, they've sold a company, they've empty nested, and they're trying to figure out, how can I make a difference in the world? And when they meet you and you connect with them really well, and they see the positive things that you're doing, and they say, oh, wow. Like, leading with the solution rather than the problem actually sometimes works better because you're making a connection, just like share your story. And they're just people too, right? They're looking for connection. They're looking for the next thing that's going to be meaningful in their lives. And so building on that is going to be a very effective way to be working with them. And again, in pretty simple terms often, because they're not experts in this area.
Great. So continuing on that theme, in the spirit of trust is paramount and listening well, I have had conversations where leaders will jump in, again, with this program officer mindset, do quick introductions at the top of an hour call, and then start running through the theory of change and the pitch deck, basically. And then contrast that with a conversation, and this is not true, obviously, there's no monolith here with all individual donors, but the contrast is someone who pauses to say, I would love to hear your story. Like, what brings you to this call? What brings you to this moment? Well, you know, my 7th grader was severely struggling with mental health during COVID and is dyslexic, and we didn't pick up on that for a while. And it was super hard for us to navigate as a family with a lot of resources. I can't imagine what families are, how they're navigating. There, you know, there's a hook, and then you know where to guide the conversation, and it becomes a relational conversation that is grounded in trust. Another example would be a donor who decided to start volunteering in a high school, basically as a FAFSA, as a financial aid counselor. And then as she got deeply connected to the young people, she realized we could be behind the scenes anonymously funding the scholarship gap for every one of these kids as I'm hearing their stories, and that comes realizing their parents are missing health insurance, and that's going to be the barrier for college. And so this can come in many different forms. Donors have a lot to offer beyond the just the treasure piece of their resources and figuring out how to engage them. We are disconnected and increasingly lonely, and we have all had the gift of working in purpose and mission-driven careers for our whole lives, I would say, actually, and that's not necessarily the case. So if you can offer that to people, it's absolute gold.
Okay, just to build on that, I was reflecting this morning as we were sitting in the plenary that part of what was so powerful is that each of those speakers this morning was really painting a version of the future that we could all imagine and see. And so I really just want to emphasize that part of what really works well is if you can paint a vision and really help the person you're sitting with see what you see in terms of what's possible and how you and they can be a part of building that together. And I know in some ways that sounds very simple, but the donors, they want to be part of a winning team. And I think it's a really difficult time in education right now, and I think oftentimes a lot of us are tired. We've been at it for a long time. And I think sometimes it's really easy for us to focus on all the things that aren't working or all the things that are hard. And part of what we need to remember is we're trying to inspire someone to come be a part of this journey with us, and we want them to feel so lucky that they can be a part of what you are creating. And so if you can hold on to that vision and that energy and that optimism, that can really make a big difference. And then to pair that vision with a story of impact, of this is where your dollars can make a meaningful difference. And to share with them, again, obvious but important, the impact that you've had, the track record that you've had so that they can believe that you can do what you say you want to do, and help them understand how their contribution will have a direct impact on students, on young people, on families, and we can be working with communities to kind of get to a different place. So again, these are all things we know, but I think sometimes it is hard to remember that part of what people want to bet on is people with a story and a vision, and you want to paint that future for them. Okay.
All right, so I'm just going to quickly cover the last two. That was great, by the way. Thank you for that. So I think one of the things that I've seen over the years, and I think we see working with donors, is that we all have a network, and it's very easy to make either assumptions about our network, kind of sleep on who we have in our, personal, professional lives or on our board. And so I really encourage folks, when you're thinking about exploring working with individual donors, start with where you are and who you already know. It's very sort of ideal. We often get sort of stuck with, I'm going to go find the new person, I'm going to chase these folks out there. The people that you already know likely, if they aren't able to give, they know someone who can. And I think starting there and having those conversations and not so much going to the people on your board or people in your professional network and saying like, who do you know that's rich that can write me a check? Obviously, don't do that. But who would resonate with this vision that we have at our organization? Like, who do you think would be aligned with this idea? And starting with that purpose is just the way in it aligns with all the other sort of tips that my colleagues have shared. It's that personal connection. So asking, and thinking about your network in that way. I've gone through that process myself when I ran an organization. I ended up being able to raise a lot more money just from my personal friend group, which, yes, can be awkward, but it wasn't. And because I just didn't realize, like, oh my goodness, I happen to have friends that are very able to give generously. And one person told me, like, they wrote a 6-figure check and said, well, you just never asked. And I was like, don't you know what I'm doing? Like, how did you not know, right? But they're right, I didn't, right? And so it just really changed my perspective on thinking about my own network differently. And then the other thing that we highly recommend is just to ask for referrals. And again, the same approach for referrals. Donors are much more likely, from what I've seen, to be motivated to give when a peer is coming to them and inviting them into the space, right? Like, there's something incredibly powerful about that peer-to-peer relationship for wealthy individuals. And so asking someone who's already made that gift, again, the same type of question, who else do you know that might resonate with this vision? Can we set up a coffee and just meet and talk about the work? Can they come to a site visit with you and bring their friend, right? Those are just, start to make your list, right? Of like, who do you think you could have these types of conversations with? And there will be something meaningful, I'm sure, that will come of that. So those are the end of our tips for now. Yes, please.
Sorry, because I didn't add it earlier. I think that one thing to keep in mind is that we are all in this together, and really what our competition is inaction. And so the more that we can inspire and bring people forward and show them, like, why have we each devoted our lives to this work? What is exciting about it? But the inaction that especially donor-advised funds enable is what we're sort of up against.
I'm sorry, just one more quick thing. To make that super concrete, also sharing the organizations who are your peers in your field. Like, we need to collectively knit this tapestry together. So if they've come to you for principal leadership, did you know there's some great teacher leadership organizations in our community as well that you're probably going to be interested in? You save them a huge amount of research time and increase the likelihood that they're going to get hooked somewhere for that next hold on the rock climbing wall.
Okay. Shall we open for questions? I think we realize this will be much more interesting and helpful if we actually hear from you. So I think we were going to kind of table the rest of what we had planned. We can come back to some discussion and table questions, but I think we'd rather move to questions just to get a feel for how we can be most helpful here.
I think I saw on the list of advisors, hi, Ben Cope, KIP Foundation. I think I saw on the list of advisors, wealth psychologist. Can you unpack the psychology of the inaction at the DAFs? What is going on in folks' heads that is causing them to be inactive with their DAF?
I'll start. I mean, part of what happens is a DAF is a vehicle that enables a donor to make the intention to give without necessarily setting aside the time or the effort that it takes to figure out what to give to. And so oftentimes, I actually think Jen alluded to this already, oftentimes people are living their lives. They're raising their kids, they're building their company. And so sometimes it's actually not an intention to hold back. It's actually that they're busy and this hasn't risen to the top of their priority list. And so I think oftentimes we think of our role as how can we make it easier for someone to give so that even if they don't have the time to dedicate, they often think like, oh, I'm going to put this off until after I raise my kids or after I sell my company. And the mantra that you hear many of us talk about is like, what if you could get started earlier? What if we made it easier for, so I think it's a prioritization issue that oftentimes people don't have enough time. That's probably much more scarce of a resource for many of them than the financial capital.
I would also say there's something, the NCFP, National Center for Family Philanthropy, put out something called the 10 Barriers to Giving that might be useful to look at. But one is not having enough information, not trusting themselves that they know that it's going to be something good they're giving to. And so again, that's what like our navigator notes are supposed to help with, to demonstrate there are just so many great things to be giving to. The other thing to keep in mind is if they've been like a tremendous business leader, they're used to being really good at what they do. And they have now entered into a world they know very little about. And so you're one of their guides in giving them confidence. And you know, they've also seen philanthropists get themselves on the front page of New York Times. They've seen, Ben and I were in that together. And they've seen them, they've seen people give to organizations that ended up not actually being very effective at all because they jumped right in. And so the more you can give them confidence, the more they can move forward.
I want to start by saying thank you so much for this. This is incredible. Sean Hardnett with Statesman College Preparatory Academy in Washington, D.C. Really important question. I remember that about 10 years ago, there was a whole lot of conversation around the amount of money that was going into public education philanthropy, but the very small amount of that was actually going to Black-led organizations. I remember a number of like 1 or 2%. I remember in other times it was less than 1%. It looks like the preliminary data right now is it looks the same. When you think of that as a reality and you think of these tips that you just gave us, what else should we be thinking about as Black leaders? What else should we be adding to these skills and ways of approaching that can help us to perhaps get over that?
Yeah, the Black girl's gonna answer. I'm gonna take the mic. So look, real talk. So that is part of the reason why, quite frankly, many of us are working to engage Black philanthropists and brown philanthropists and just different types of donors. Because I think I'm not saying that that's going to be a solution to every sort of Black organization getting funded, but there's just a natural connection point. Culturally, right, that most of the donors we work with would at least see from jump, right? There's going to be some things you don't have to explain about your work, right? I think, my experience and belief now, and we may even have some Black folks in the room who do their own giving, I'm sure we do, is that what hasn't happened is that Black philanthropists have not been sort of, I don't say welcomed, but have been in the spaces where the philanthropy conversations are happening, right? And so as a result, there's just lack of knowledge about all of these amazing, phenomenal nonprofits, schools that have been started and doing phenomenal things. Why would people know that in their general day-to-day life? Like, they're just not gonna know that unless they're in this sector. And so I think there's a real opportunity to help do the matchmaking, do the bumble, right? In terms of general philanthropy, I think we have some phenomenal foundations that are continuing to stay the course, and I think with really looking to seed and support diverse organizations and organizations working with diverse populations of kids, we need to continue to keep the peer pressure of other philanthropists sort of really pushing the needle of their peers to continue to support those organizations. I wish I had more to share on that, but I think that's where we are. But I think Becky wants to add.
Yeah, I was going to talk about, I think allyship in the philanthropy world is as important as it is in the, practitioner world. And one of the things, Jen and I host retreats and cohorts of donors, and one of the modules, if you will, in the curriculum is about what it means to become a dream donor. And those dream donors are the ones that, we all have, the ones you can just share all the bad stuff as well as the things that are going well, and they're true partners through the rough stuff. And we talk about power dynamics. We talk about racial power dynamics. We're trying to sort of train up the philanthropist to show up better in the relationship and to really think about how do you have an awareness around that. And we have people like Liz Thompson or Liz Ibar-Conti, speaking about their donor journey and really trying to be a model for people in terms of you don't have to do it in the ways that it's been done before, and what does it look like to be more connected, more relational, and more aware of the power you're bringing into the relationship.
I'm just going to share one more thing, and I can't speak to the Black experience, but what I will do is speak to my experience in the early days of fundraising, where I felt a lot of distance that I was creating with all the reasons why I felt like the person I was sitting with was different from me. They have more money, they have more access, they grew up this way, all these stories that I would make up before I even sat down. And I would do all this research and I would learn as much as we could. We had a great development team that would put all this stuff in. And actually, the thing I try to do now is I barely do any of that research. And my first conversation is, I want to hear your story. And if you can tap into that, because that you know how to do with families, you know how to do it with kids, you know how to do it with teachers and leaders. If you can also do that and just meet someone human to human, that first conversation will lead to more conversations, will lead to more trust and more to come than one in which you come in with a very clear agenda and you've already created a lot of distance between you and this person who you're trying to get to know. So that's just a hard one, lessons on my own part.
I wonder if it's, sure.
Are individual philanthropists a source of funding for a for-profit educational startup, and how? I mean, NewSchools has been awesome. They funded us.
So was the question a individual? Okay, yeah. Do you want to take that? Or do you want to take it? I'm happy to. Well, so one of again our modules is explaining to, they're not necessarily donors yet. Becky called them donors. Sometimes they're ultra high net wealth people who haven't figured out how to be donors at all. We had a woman come in like flustered into a 3-day retreat we were going to. She's like, I was just doing X, Y, and Z, and what are we here for again? Like my friend told me to be here, and we're like, we're here for philanthropy and talking about how to use, give your tithes, treasure, talent, testimony and truth in service of something else. And then, like 2 hours into it, she had a light bulb moment. She's like, oh my God, I should have started this 10 years ago. My husband's been a CEO of a Fortune 100 company for the last 15 years. How did this not even occur to us? We have been so busy, and she has been like going since then. So one of the modules is around impact investing. And one of the things that we talk about is impact first versus just impact investing. Yes, trying to make that distinction, right? So if you're truly an impact first investor, what you're doing is you're saying, how do I get my money to the goal, the impact that I want, and then not worry about the return so much? Because if you're willing to be giving philanthropically, then there's some pool of money that you might be willing to do with impact investing. So we've been trying to get people to recognize that, especially in ed tech, there's a lot of need for early money that allows people to stay focused on impact. And I'll give you actually an example of somebody that may solve this a little better at scale, but is really tiny right now and starting. There is a opportunity for someone who's very, very good at ed tech investing to create a vehicle that would be easier for people to give into, because a lot of the time the impact investing is a little hard for them, even if they're like, oh, right. We want to be able to do that, and you can talk to how difficult it can be.
Isn't that NewSchools?
It is also NewSchools, yes. So NewSchools is doing an important piece of that, and then we hope there'll be more vehicles also, right? So where DAFs can easily sort of find a vehicle where there's expertise, that it almost acts like a mutual fund, where they're able to say, we can give loans early, for instance. So for ed tech companies that don't want VC money or might not be positioned to get VC money because it pulls them off mission, we think that there need to be more vehicles, and NewSchools is a really important vehicle as well to be getting that money to go forward. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, just briefly, I think part of the good news about this maybe shift from big foundation giving is that a lot of these donors do have multiple vehicles to give money. So they could do political giving, they could do C4 advocacy work, they could do impact investing out of different pools of their funds. And I think one of the things with one of my clients, we were looking at adolescent mental health, and I think her vision was like, maybe in 5 years I'd be ready for impact investing. But very quickly we learned to work at the scale that she wanted to, we really had to be working with companies that were working in adolescent mental health that had the reach, but were waiting to get approved for Medicaid reimbursement and needed to keep that forefront in their goals. So we got into it faster than we would have otherwise. And when we did, there's a stat that nearly 90% of families want to talk to their wealth managers about philanthropy, and fewer than 20% of wealth managers talk to their families about philanthropy without being prompted. The next level of that is a lot of the wealth managers don't even know that the donor-advised funds can make program-related investments for impact-first investing. And so I would send you to a recent paper from Michael Brown at Wharton Social Finance Institute, who's trying to get this into the water supply for wealth managers to understand the many creative ways you can bring all types of capital to social impact challenges.
And the other thing is, when you get people excited about impact-first investing, particularly, it often unlocks a much, much bigger bucket of money that they can be moving. And often also gets people who have been on the investment side making their money that much more excited about working in the nonprofits or impact-first sector.
The mic somewhere, yes.
Hi, I'm Carol Lloyd. I'm at Great Schools, and John says hi to both of you. And I feel like we have always avoided this individual donor approach, partly because we just assume that we're kind of outside of that, what individual donors might be focused on or moved by. And I wonder, do you think that there are certain sectors of the education world where it's just not the greatest match?
No? I think it's a question of finding the right people. Like, the other thing to keep in mind is often the way people made money, if they're self-made, is often related to how they want to give or what's happened in the way they want to give. So that is like someone who's been a really data-driven business person often cares a ton about the data. And so I would be thinking about the way people made money too in terms of matching.
Yeah, I would echo that. I don't think there's a limit. You want to find the right match for the right person, right? They're the people that are going to be very motivated by coming to a school visit and seeing our beautiful babies, having a high quality literacy program. Like one donor I brought to something and they wrote a check like within the next week because it was so phenomenal. They saw it and had that sort of felt need. But I think there are donors who are going to be connected to different types of things. Honestly, I think there's going to be potentially a smaller slice of them, right? And having done work raising money for things like advocacy organizations, like there's a certain type of person that's going to be connected to the long-term work of advocacy. But I think it's our responsibility as leaders to build the relationship, to make the case that's going to fit them. And then I think there's something for everyone. If I were going to bet money on it, I'd say, sure, there are going to be a chunk of donors for whom the felt need may get them first. But also, that's just the first bite at the apple, right? Like, once they get into, what's happening in schools, you have that opportunity to help them see, sort of the broader systemic work that needs to happen to improve the whole system. And then all the underlying root causes, that's part of what a lot of us are doing, is helping donors, find their entry point, but then design learning experiences to help them sort of go deeper and deeper until they become sort of true root problem-solving givers is how we think about it. And so I think there's a possibility in a spectrum. Again, you can't do all of that. We're here to do some of that as this type of sector grows as well.
I was just going to share, there's a framework that shows that individual donors go from giving to giving more. And then there's a third step, which might be systemic giving. And that third hop is a hard one to make, and often hard without a guide or a peer sort of introducing them to why intermediaries matter. Why, I've led a teacher leadership organization for a bunch of years, and it was hard to explain why this is so critical to district improvement. But that, again, in the spirit of we are collectively drawing donors into our sector, and we have to do that through the hope and the optimism and inspiration that we heard about this morning, but also through starting to weave the parts of the story for people to understand how the layers of the system connect, but in a very accessible way. And I think that's going to be part of the success of that. And I have a donor who, again, moved to systems level giving within a year because we heard a really clear story about with this amount of money, we will be able to basically flip 36 states to enable school-based mental health services to be paid for in those states. Boom to boom to boom. Oh my gosh, I can have that kind of impact with this amount of money. I had no idea.
I would also say it's beyond money sometimes, what can be impactful, and this matching a donor to where they can have impact is very much what we try to do, and that's the listening. So I'm gonna give you one story that a friend of mine said, will you talk to me about our philanthropy? Like, just spend 20 minutes with me tomorrow. Yes, I will. So get on the phone with him. He's first gen, super smart. Grew up in going to a big high school, was not that excited about school for a lot of the reasons that we work around. And he said to me, what I really want to do is I want to find the kid like me, who in high school, didn't look like he cared very much, but was actually totally engaged in learning, went on to commuter college, and could have been in sort of a solid earning job, but also could have done more. I want to find that kid in my high school and give a $5,000 scholarship. Does that sound good? Shall I do that? And so I listened to him for a while. I was like, that sounds awesome. And you're married to my friend. I know you could do at least 2 of those scholarships. And so then at the end of it, his story was in the middle of college. Someone said to him, he was an accounting major, and said to him, do you know the difference between getting a 3.8 and not getting a 3.8? It's being like a solid accountant on Main Street versus like writing your own ticket to doing anything. And he said, what? What are you talking about? It makes that difference? Then I'll get a 3.8. It never occurred to me that I cared enough. So he did, and then he got hired by a big accounting firm, boom, 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 became CEO of Brooks Brothers. First CEO of color, Brooks Brothers. So I listened to him for this whole time, and I said, Ken, I think that is an awesome idea. Go back to your high school, clearly where his heart is. And by the way, have you ever heard of Braven? And he was like, what? And I said, they're doing this at scale. He said, what? There's an organization doing this? Like making sure kids know that getting on a leadership trajectory in their employment makes a difference. And he said, I need to talk to that CEO immediately. And so Ami was on the phone with him in no time, and less than a year later, he was the keynote speaker at her 10-year anniversary, and was also matching kids into internship, and not kids, college students into internship, first-gen students, and he was a donor at whatever level they were ready to be doing at that moment. It has been so fulfilling for him and gotten them more and more into thinking about economic mobility and that kind of thing. But that started with, he was thinking, I want to make a difference, but his frame of reference was my high school, my experience, but he was so ready to have it expanded.
All right. Hi, Nicholas Tishuk at Bedside Meetings Charter School in Brooklyn. Especially in K-12, a lot of the focus is around growth, expansion. And we've done some of that, but I'm wondering if there's a way to think about individual donors and deepening the existing work of a single school or a single school community, so it's not, hey, Bedside Meetings, Jersey City, Bedside Meetings, Chicago, but just doing what we're doing well in our area as opposed to just trying to get more seats.
I think that's a really important thing for all of us to be thinking about. And I recognize that there are a number of funders whose funders are very focused on growth, and therefore they are also very focused on growth. And yet, at the same time, I see those intermediaries now really trying to either deepen practice, to try and figure out how to support sort of pipelines of leaders, and to do things that are still in service of serving kids, and but doing it well. And so this attention sort of, and I've always been a believer that we don't have to choose between growth and quality, but I do believe that there's a really important role for sustaining quality and to ensuring that the kids that we're already serving are getting their needs met. And I think for a single site organization or for one that's focused on a local geography, the implication for individual donors is really to find the people who care about the future of that particular community or that particular neighborhood, and the people who will stay with you even as national trends or sort of donor behaviors, go through waves of different things, that they will be deeply interested in sustaining the care of this group of kids in this community, in this neighborhood. So yes, I think there is room for that, and I believe there are people out there who care deeply about the place that they live and want to make sure there's continued opportunity in those places.
And I would just go back to that example I gave about the donor getting deeply engaged with young people in the school in her community. And now, I mean, she said, we are going to give away basically all of our excess. We don't want this money. This needs to pour into the kids, and their families. And so the power of that human connection, I just cannot underscore it enough. So thinking about donors beyond, Jen mentioned it, beyond the money, but also what are the time and the talents and the retired HR director who could actually help you build a talent system, and that would be the most fulfilling thing they've done in a long time.
One more question? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll give you this. Easier. Yeah.
Jen, you gave a compelling story about Braven, and we had the pleasure of meeting earlier by chance, but other than meeting by chance, how do we get on your radar? I'm glad I had the last question.
Rather, if someone hadn't asked it, I'd have been surprised. Look, we are obviously we have great capacity and limited capacity, both, just like all of us in the room. But certainly, I can speak for myself, and I'll let others share. I'm very open to hearing about the phenomenal work that organizations are doing. I think we're going to give a slide with our websites to share, and you're welcome to reach out. As much as we can do to make matches and to introduce people, we're happy to do that. We really cannot overpromise that, though. So I want to be really clear, right? If we hear from 100 people, like, we're probably not able to help everybody, but that's the work that we do. And if it's not us that can help you, we're certainly, we're growing the sector and the space, and we're happy to make introductions to other people that come our way. Again, we don't want to overpromise, but we want to be helpful where we can. I'll let everyone share.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest number of balls I'm dropping right now are the connections that, this organization to this piece, and it is like individual matchmaking right now. So I was not jokingly talking about Bumble at the beginning, but truly the plumbing for these connections is not built. It just doesn't exist in the field. It's very ad hoc, and we can't do it as individuals. So I would just say, like, one of the systems challenges we're thinking about collectively and others are, not just the four of us, God knows, but is what does the infrastructure and plumbing need to look like to make this match process easier? And I'll just say, for me personally, if I can't take the meeting, I sure wouldn't mind having that one page or the awesome video of 3 minutes that's just like, hey, TLDR, here's what we do when you have somebody who's interested in, grad students who are between summers in business school, as I'm looking at Melissa here, we're an organization to have on your radar, and just let me put that at least in my peripheral vision, and that's a start until we get some of this plumbing better built.
Yeah, it is a trade-off because, it's more fun to talk to you guys than do a lot of the things that we're doing in building the infrastructure. And so it would be great to be able to take all those meetings. Like, as a program officer, I never had time to do enough of it. So trying to do all these other things and that not actually being exactly my job, it's pretty hard. So one of the other ways that we think about it is, how do we talk to people who know, right? Even if it's one, like, Frances is critical, right? She has funded most of you in this, or NewSchools has funded most of you in this room. And it's usually a really narrow thing we're looking for because we know what the donor is looking for. And so it's like a little bit of a game of concentration and memory. And so to be able to go to Christy or Frances or City Fund, or even, knowing, the whole network of KIPP schools, that kind of thing, and say, who fits this when someone, and that's more the way I've been trying to think about it, just because of the scale problem and time problem. And at the same time, I love your idea that the one paragraph piece is awesome. Yes, and it's one of the reasons also we're here. Like, it's so fun to be hearing other panels and learning more about other organizations and sitting at breakfast and hearing them.
One thing that I want to share, because I worry all the time that you're going to overinvest your time with us at a time when we may not have a donor who's interested in the thing you're doing. And so one of the things I learned from working in a grant-making role is like a fast no is actually the most compassionate thing we can do. And so if you reach out, oftentimes I'll say, I don't have a donor right now who is interested in what you're doing, but if you can send me the thing, or I'm happy to take a meeting, but only if it is a good use of your time, knowing that you're investing for the long term, not for the right now. So I guess what I would ask is some grace from us, because you're going to hear no from us a lot, because unless we have a thing that we think there's like the potential where we can influence towards, then we don't want to take your time. And we want to be respectful of that. So just know that that's the tension that we're juggling all the time. We were talking a little bit about like the challenge is this field of philanthropic advisors is really fragmented right now. And part of the role that Jen and Becky have played as an example is they've actually tried to gather other philanthropic advisors together and teach them about K-12 education, so that other people who are doing what we do but work on different issues are more educated about our space. Sydney is launching an effort that's very focused on making it easy for folks to navigate also the K-12 space. So there are many of us working on this. Alex Johnston, as you all may know, has for years been cultivating cohorts of advisors and helping them really to hone their craft and to deepen their understanding of donor psychology and the like. So we'll do the best we can to kind of play this bridge role. And I think what we're going to see in coming months and years is this part of the ecosystem is going to evolve quite a bit. And I want us to approach it with a sense of abundance, because I do think there are so many people whose names we've never heard who have the capacity to be incredibly generous. And the people in this room and this community of entrepreneurs has the opportunity to really engage their imagination. So, thank you.
And I appreciate the grace comment, because I think it's truly needed. So we're also entrepreneurs, right? Like, we are building new things, and so we're growing, and we don't, if I had a list of 10,000 donors, I'd be happy to like match everybody, but that's just not where our work is. Like, it's a beautiful process, and we're getting traction, but we're building relationships with donors just like you all are trying to do, right? And so I just want to kind of acknowledge that we're also in a growth stage, and the grace and the one-pagers are a super helpful way to engage and to help us know more about your work. So thank you. Yeah.
One more thing that sort of overlaps with what April said, but when I was saying trade-offs of time, we are doing all we can to get for education, to get on the radar of overall philanthropy of new donors. And so that's the level at which we're like, if the DAF holders know more about education, it's going to serve all of us, but it's unfortunately a slower game than we would like. There was one moment this morning, I got an email, I don't know if you saw it yet, from an organization that trains about 350 new advisors every year, and they said, we've been hearing so much about your work and the navigator notes. Can you like have a call with us next week to tell us what this is about? And I was like, oh my God, like someone's coming to us now asking for education to be inserted into what's an amazing curriculum that they've designed for Daylight Impact Advisors. And so that's the kind of level, like if we can get education there, so people have to have it on their radar and decide not to do it, instead of not even have it on their radar and say, oh, climate's important, democracy, all of those things are important too, but we want to be on their radar. So again, I would say the theme is our competition is inaction or education not being on the radar, and then we all need to work together to figure out how do we steward more people who are going to feel fulfilled and make a difference and impact in this incredibly important work we're all unified in trying to do.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.